They locked her away for 20 years, erased her name, buried her existence, and swore the world would never hear her voice. But one night, a cry from the basement shattered every lie they ever built. What happened next exposed a secret so dark, it changed an entire town forever. If you love heart-stopping suspense, emotional miracles, and shocking twists that leave you breathless, then subscribe to this channel, because this story will haunt you long after it ends. For 20 years, the Hawthorne mansion stood at the edge of town like a silent judge, its windows dark, its gates rusted but always locked, and inside those walls lived a secret that even the wind seemed afraid to whisper about. The townspeople of Black Hollow used to speak of the Hawthornes in hushed admiration. Wealthy, influential, generous donors to the church and hospital, until the night their 5-year-old daughter, Alara Hawthorne, died, in a tragic accident. At least that was the story printed in the local paper, signed and verified by the town's most respected physician, Dr. Marcus Hale, a longtime friend of the family. No funeral was held, no body was ever seen, but grief was explained as private and too unbearable to share, and so life moved on, seasons changed, children grew, and the mansion became quieter than a grave, except it was not grief that haunted those walls. It was breathing, soft and trembling, hidden behind cedar doors in a closet sealed with iron bolts, where a child grew into a woman without sunlight, without mirrors, without knowing the sound of her own laughter, because laughter had been forbidden. Alara was not dead, she was inconvenient. She had been born different, her eyes 2 different colors, one storm gray, one honey gold, and on the night of her 5th birthday, when guests filled the ballroom and music spilled like champagne, she said something that chilled her father to his bones. She looked at a stranger across the room and whispered, "He's going to fall down the stairs in 7 minutes," and 7 minutes later the man lay bleeding at the bottom of the grand staircase, neck twisted, eyes wide in disbelief. It was called coincidence, a child's imagination, until it happened again, and again, and again. She predicted a kitchen fire, a carriage accident, even the sudden heart attack of a visiting senator. Each time she was right. Each time her father's smile tightened. In Black Hollow, faith ran deep but so did fear, and when rumors began to spread that the Hawthorne girl was touched, or worse, cursed, Charles Hawthorne made a decision that would damn his soul. He declared his daughter dead and locked her away, convincing his wife, Lydia, that it was for protection, that the world would destroy her, experiment on her, call her a monster. Lydia resisted at first, but grief and manipulation are powerful chains, and soon she visited her daughter only in secret, bringing books, brushing her hair in the dark, whispering apologies through tears, while Charles ordered Drive Hale to forge documents, to sign a death certificate, to erase Alara from existence. The closet was small at first, a storage room behind Lydia's dressing chamber, but over time it was expanded into a hidden suite between the walls, soundproofed, windowless, invisible. Alara grew up counting the footsteps above her head, memorizing the patterns of rain against stone, speaking to spiders as if they were friends. She learned to read from old novels her mother smuggled in, to write in charcoal on the back of wallpaper, to survive on hope so fragile it sometimes felt imaginary, but she never lost her strange knowing. Sometimes she would wake and tell her mother, "Don't go to the market tomorrow," and Lydia would pretend not to listen, only to hear later of a violent robbery in the square. Sometimes she would say, "Father is lying about something bigger than me," and Lydia would flinch. Years passed. Lydia's visits became less frequent as Charles tightened control. Eventually even she was forbidden from seeing her daughter, told it was for the best, told that Alara needed to fade completely. And so she did, fading into silence, until the night everything broke. It began with a storm that rattled the mansion like a beast clawing to get in, thunder rolling over Black Hollow in waves of fury, lightning slicing the sky into white scars. In the basement, where Charles kept old wine and older secrets, a sound echoed between stone walls. A cry, not loud, but raw, animal, desperate. It wasn't Alara's voice. It was a child's. Upstairs, Charles froze, glass trembling in his hand. There were no children in that house. Lydia had died 3 years earlier under mysterious circumstances. A fall from the balcony, another tragic accident. Charles had insisted it was grief that drove her to distraction. The townspeople nodded politely, but now the cry came again, thin and terrified, and for the first time in 20 years, fear, not control. moved Charles Hawthorne. He descended into the basement with a lantern, heart pounding against ribs that had long forgotten guilt. At the far end of the cellar, behind racks of dust-coated bottles, was a door he had never opened. He swore it had not existed before. The crying came from behind it. He unlocked it with shaking hands and stepped inside, and what he saw made the lantern slip from his grasp. There, curled on the stone floor, was a little boy no older than 5, soaked, shivering, eyes mismatched. One storm gray, one honey gold. Charles staggered backward, whispering, "No, no, no," because he knew those eyes. The child looked up and said softly, "She sent me, upstairs." In the hidden room behind the walls, Alara Hawthorne sat upright in darkness, eyes open though she had not heard the cry with her ears. She had felt it, like a pulse under her skin. For years her visions had grown stronger, not weaker, and recently they had begun to change. She no longer saw accidents. She saw truths. She saw her mother's fall, not as an accident but as a push. She saw Dr. Hale signing forged documents while wiping sweat from his brow. She saw a fire 20 years ago in a laboratory beneath the mansion. Yes, a laboratory, because Charles Hawthorne's wealth had not come from inheritance but from research, from experiments conducted in secrecy on children rumored to have abilities, children who vanished from orphanages, whose names were never missed. Alara was not the only one. She had been the only success. The only one who survived. And when her predictions proved real, Charles did not see a daughter. He saw a weapon. But weapons cannot be allowed free will. So he hid her. Not to protect her from the world, but to protect his monopoly on her gift. The little boy in the basement was proof that the past had not stayed buried. He was another child, stolen recently, whose ability mirrored Alara's. Charles had tried to recreate what he once discovered by accident. 2 rare genetic markers colliding to produce heightened perception. But something had gone wrong. The boy had escaped his containment and found the door. And now Alara saw everything. She saw the town sheriff driving toward the mansion at that very moment because he too had heard the cry carried by the storm. She saw Dr. Hale packing a suitcase, planning to flee before secrets surfaced. She saw herself standing in sunlight for the first time, and she knew the moment had come. Hidden mechanisms within her walls, installed by Charles to observe her, became her tools. Over years of silence, she had studied the sounds of locks, memorized the rhythm of guards who no longer believed she was conscious of them. Tonight, the storm masked her movements. She pressed against a loose panel she had been weakening for months. Wood cracked. Air rushed in like freedom itself. When she stepped into the corridor, pale and thin but unbroken, she looked less like a ghost and more like judgment. Downstairs, Charles tried to grab the boy, but the child screamed again, louder, and the basement lights flickered out. In the darkness, a voice echoed. Alara's, steady and calm. "It ends tonight, Father." He stumbled toward the stairs only to find her standing there. 25 years old, hair cascading like a shadow, eyes blazing with a knowledge that could burn empires. He whispered her name as if speaking to a revenant. She descended slowly, each step echoing with the weight of stolen years. "You told them I was dead," she said, "but the dead don't dream, and I have dreamed of this night since I was 5. The sheriff burst through the front doors moments later, gun drawn by neighbors who reported strange lights and cries. What he found was chaos. Charles on his knees, a trembling boy clinging to Alara's dress, and a woman who should not exist standing in the center of the storm-lit foyer. The truth unraveled quickly after that. Hidden rooms were discovered, files were found. The laboratory beneath the cellar revealed rusted equipment and records of children who never came home. Dr. Hale was arrested at dawn, suitcase in hand. The town that once praised the Hawthornes watched in horror as headlines replaced admiration with outrage. But the most astonishing revelation came not from the crimes, but from Alara herself. When questioned about her abilities, she did not speak of curses or prophecy. She spoke of patterns, of listening deeply enough to hear what others ignore. The hitch in a breath before a heart fails, the tremor in a floorboard before a fall, the subtle chemistry of smoke before flame. She was not supernatural. She was perceptive beyond measure, a mind sharpened by isolation and trauma. The miracle was not magic. It was resilience. As for the boy, his name was Samuel, and he had been taken from a neighboring city. He clung to Alara as if she were a lighthouse, and perhaps she was. In the weeks that followed, Alara testified against her father with a composure that stunned the courtroom. Charles Hawthorne, once untouchable, was sentenced to life imprisonment. When asked if she hated him, she replied, "Hate would mean he still owns part of me." The mansion was demolished, its stones sold, its secrets exposed. In its place, years later, stood a sanctuary for children who had been forgotten or hidden, funded by the estate seized from Charles. Alara refused to be called a victim. She studied psychology, neuroscience, dedicating her life to understanding how extraordinary perception can emerge from extraordinary pain. Sometimes she still woke at night, heart racing from dreams of closets and thunder, but she would walk outside into open air, feel grass beneath her feet, and remind herself that doors are meant to open. The town of Black Hollow changed too. It learned that evil does not always snarl. It sometimes smiles at fundraisers and signs checks for charity. It learned that silence can be complicity, and on certain stormy nights, when thunder rolls across the hills, people remember the cry from the basement that shattered 20 years of lies, and they whisper about the girl who was hidden in a closet but emerged a beacon. Because the true miracle was not that she predicted tragedy, it was that she survived it, that she turned captivity into clarity, darkness into vision, and pain into purpose. And if you listen closely, beyond the echo of that storm, you might hear something else. Not a cry, but laughter, soft and free, rising from a house that no longer exists, carried on wind that finally has nothing left to hide.